It was a cold evening on December 1st, 1950, in Montgomery, Alabama. The streets were calm, the city lights dim, and the hum of the bus echoed through the still air. Among the passengers sat a quiet woman named Rosa Parks, a seamstress known not for her voice, but for her steady grace. Yet that night, her silence spoke louder than any protest ever could. When the bus began to fill, the driver ordered her to give up her seat for a white passenger, as required by the cruel laws of segregation that ruled the South. But Rosa did not move. She did not shout, argue, or fight. She simply said, that single word, small, calm, yet full of power, would ignite one of the most significant movements in American history. Imagine the weight of that moment. A tired woman after a long day of work, choosing to risk arrest, humiliation, and danger rather than surrender her dignity. Rosa Parks did not set out to become a hero. She was just a citizen demanding respect, equality, and the simple right to sit where she belonged. Her arrest sent shockwaves through Montgomery. The next morning, news spread like wildfire. Leaflets were printed. Church meetings overflowed. Ordinary people, teachers, workers, mothers, and students decided to take a stand by not standing on buses at all. What began as one woman's quiet defiance grew into a 381-day protest that would shake the foundations of segregation. This was not just about a bus seat. It was about freedom, about the right of every person to live without fear, without shame, and without the constant reminder that they were seen as less than others. Rosa's courage gave birth to a movement that united thousands under a common purpose: justice. And through that unity rose a young pastor named Martin Luther King Jr., who would become the voice of a generation demanding change through peace. Together, they turned a local protest into a national awakening, proving that even in darkness, a single act of courage can light the way for millions. Rosa Parks did not know she was changing history that night. She just knew what was right. Her story reminds us that real power does not always come from loud voices or grand speeches. It often comes from quiet strength, from the simple act of saying no to injustice. If stories like this inspire you, if you believe in the courage of ordinary people who change the world, then make sure to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and turn on notifications. Together, we will keep exploring the untold stories that shaped history, one act of bravery at a time. When Rosa Parks was arrested that cold December night, few could have imagined the storm her quiet defiance would unleash. The police took her away not because she shouted or caused a scene, but because she refused to surrender her seat. An ordinary act turned into an extraordinary statement. News of her arrest spread rapidly through Montgomery's African American community, whispered in barber shops, church halls, and classrooms. People felt something stir within them, an awakening long overdue. It was not just about a bus anymore. It was about a life lived under rules that demanded submission, about years of silent endurance finally breaking into a voice of unity. Rosa's calm strength became a mirror for countless others who had faced humiliation but remained silent. Her quiet dignity contrasted sharply with the harshness of the law that sought to punish her. There was no anger in her face, no bitterness in her words, only resolve. That image, of a woman standing firm in her truth, became a symbol that transcended Montgomery. People began to see that courage did not need to roar. It could whisper and still shake the walls of oppression. Within hours, community leaders gathered to discuss what had happened. Among them was a young pastor named Martin Luther King Jr., whose voice carried both compassion and conviction. They realized that Rosa's arrest was not an isolated incident. It was the spark they had been waiting for. Plans formed quickly, and the Montgomery Bus Boycott was born. The idea was simple yet powerful. If the system treated black citizens as less than human on its buses, then those citizens would no longer ride them. The boycott was not a cry of vengeance but a call for respect. It was resistance through peace, through unity, through sacrifice. In the days that followed, buses rolled through the city half empty. Men and women who relied on public transport began walking miles to work. Rain or shine, carpools were organized. Churches became rallying points, offering not just rides but hope. Each step on those long walks was a quiet act of rebellion, a statement that dignity could not be bought or bullied. Every evening, people returned home exhausted but proud, knowing they were part of something larger than themselves. Rosa's name spread beyond Alabama. Newspapers printed her story. Ministers across the South spoke her name from their pulpits. To many, she was not merely a symbol, she was proof that change could begin with one person who chose to act. Yet, while the movement gained momentum, life for Rosa and her husband, Raymond, grew difficult. She lost her job at the department store, and he was pressured to resign. They received threats, letters filled with hatred. But they refused to give in. Her courage inspired others, but it also came at a great personal cost. As the boycott continued, the city tried to break the movement. Leaders were arrested, churches were attacked, and intimidation ran rampant. But still, the buses remained empty. The people of Montgomery had found strength in solidarity, and no law could force them back into submission. Rosa's quiet defiance had awakened a collective will that would not be silenced. When the Supreme Court finally ruled that bus segregation was unconstitutional, the victory resonated far beyond Alabama. It was not just a legal triumph, it was a moral one. The boycott had lasted 381 days, an entire year of walking, enduring, and believing, and at the heart of it all was Rosa Parks, whose single act of resistance had reminded a nation of its conscience. Her courage had become contagious. Across the South, communities began organizing sit-ins, marches, and peaceful protests. Rosa's arrest had proven that non-violence could be more powerful than rage, that dignity could disarm cruelty. People began to realize that justice did not require violence to be victorious. It required conviction, unity, and a faith that truth could overcome fear. Rosa never sought fame. She did not see herself as a hero, but as a citizen doing what was right. Yet history would remember her differently. To generations that followed, she became the embodiment of grace under pressure, of moral strength in the face of injustice. Her composure on that bus and throughout the storm that followed taught the world that real power lies in restraint, in humanity, and in the unyielding belief that every person deserves respect. Even after the boycott ended, Rosa continued her work quietly, advocating for justice and equality, mentoring young people who would carry forward the movement she helped inspire. Her story was not about defiance alone, it was about endurance, faith, and the unbreakable human spirit. Through her actions, she showed that peaceful resistance was not weakness. It was the highest form of strength. The image of Rosa Parks sitting on that bus remains one of the most powerful symbols in modern history. It reminds us that change often begins in the smallest moments when one person chooses to stand firm. Even while sitting down, it reminds us that the line between ordinary and extraordinary is drawn by courage, and it reminds us that dignity, once claimed, cannot be taken away by force. That night in Montgomery, Rosa Parks transformed the course of a nation without raising her voice, without lifting her hand. Her quiet stand became a movement, her arrest became a message, and her story became a legacy of courage, of peace, and of the enduring belief that every act of justice, no matter how small, can change the world forever. The morning after Rosa Parks' arrest, the streets of Montgomery buzzed with quiet determination. Flyers circulated hand to hand, printed in haste yet filled with purpose, calling for every black citizen to stay off the buses in protest. The message was clear. If one woman could be arrested for sitting with dignity, Then the entire community would rise by walking together. It was a bold idea, one that few believed could last more than a few days. But as dawn broke on December 5, 1950, something extraordinary unfolded. The buses rolled through the neighborhoods almost empty. The seats that once carried hundreds of weary workers sat vacant. And the city's drivers soon realized that the heart of Montgomery had chosen to walk. It was not an organized army that led this movement, but ordinary men and women who believed in their shared humanity. Teachers, maids, factory workers, and students joined in silent unity, turning each step of their daily journey into a quiet act of resistance. The sound of shoes striking the pavement replaced the familiar growl of bus engines. The boycott was not just a protest, it became a daily testament of faith, endurance, and solidarity. At the center of this movement emerged a young pastor, Martin Luther King Jr., who had only recently moved to Montgomery. He was chosen to lead the newly formed Montgomery Improvement Association, not because he sought power, but because his voice carried a calm authority that inspired trust. When he spoke at the Holt Street Baptist Church, the sanctuary overflowed with people standing shoulder to shoulder, listening in rapt silence as he declared that the time had come to rise through peace. His words did not call for hatred or retaliation, but for courage and discipline. "We must meet hate with love," he said. And that conviction became the heartbeat of the movement. The days turned into weeks, and the boycott showed no sign of fading. People organized carpool systems that rivaled the efficiency of the city's bus routes. Volunteers with cars picked up strangers each morning, driving them to work before returning to help others. Churches became logistical centers, distributing funds, coordinating routes, and offering hope to those who began to tire. The simple act of walking had turned into a profound statement that the people of Montgomery would no longer pay to be humiliated. City officials were caught off guard. At first, they dismissed the boycott, assuming it would collapse under its own strain. But as the months passed, their frustration grew. The bus companies' profits plummeted, and the mayor called for police crackdowns to intimidate participants. Arrests were made, homes were threatened, and even Martin Luther King Jr.'s house was bombed one night while his family slept inside. Yet, through every act of intimidation, the people stood firm. They gathered the next morning in the streets, not with anger, but with prayer and determination. The movement's power lay not in violence but in its refusal to yield. For Rosa Parks, the boycott meant watching her act of defiance transform into a living movement. She remained a quiet presence, attending meetings and supporting others while the struggle grew far beyond her own story. The community looked to her as a symbol of what they were fighting for: dignity, fairness, and the right to exist without fear. Her bravery had become the spark, but now it was the collective courage of thousands that kept the flame alive. The boycott endured through the sweltering heat of summer and the biting cold of winter. Shoes wore thin, feet ached, but spirits remained unbroken. Neighbors who had never spoken before now shared rides, stories, and purpose. Unity replaced division, and faith became stronger than fatigue. The sight of empty buses rolling through Montgomery was both haunting and hopeful, a silent reminder of how far ordinary people could go when united by conviction. As national newspapers began reporting on the movement, the world took notice. Images of peaceful protesters walking along dusty roads or standing in long lines for carpools reached audiences far beyond Alabama. The nation began to see the undeniable truth that change was coming, not through chaos, but through the unwavering strength of those who refused to surrender their humanity. Inside courtrooms, lawyers worked tirelessly to challenge the legality of segregation. They built their arguments around the simple premise that separate was never equal. The fight was not just on the streets, it was also being waged in the halls of justice, where reason and morality began to challenge decades of prejudice. Each hearing brought new hope, and each ruling, even when delayed or denied, only strengthened their resolve. When the final decision came from the Supreme Court in November 1956, declaring bus segregation unconstitutional, Montgomery erupted in quiet triumph. There were no grand celebrations, no parades or speeches, just a deep, collective sigh of relief. After 381 days of walking, the people could finally sit down again, not in submission, but in victory. Rosa Parks' single act had grown into one of the most powerful demonstrations of peaceful resistance in modern history. The Montgomery Bus Boycott did more than desegregate public transportation, it redefined the meaning of protest. It proved unity could break chains, that courage could confront cruelty, and that peace could achieve what force never could. Martin Luther King Jr. emerged from it as a national leader, and Rosa Parks became the enduring face of quiet defiance. Together, they had shown the world that dignity could not be legislated away, and that justice, once awakened, could not be silenced. The legacy of the boycott extended far beyond Montgomery. It became the blueprint for future movements, from sit-ins at lunch counters to marches on Washington. It taught a generation that change often begins with ordinary people who decide that enough is enough. And though the road ahead remained long and filled with struggle, the people of Montgomery had already proven one truth that could never again be denied. When a community stands together, even the most entrenched injustice can be moved, one step at a time. As the Montgomery bus boycott stretched from days into months, the impact began to ripple far beyond the city's streets. At first, officials dismissed it as a passing disturbance, a short-lived protest that would soon fade under the weight of inconvenience. But Montgomery's leaders underestimated both the endurance and the unity of the community that Rosa Parks and Martin Luther King Jr. had inspired. Every morning, the buses rolled through neighborhoods that were once full of life and motion, their empty seats echoing like a quiet reminder of resistance. Drivers sat behind their wheels, watching the same routes stretch endlessly before them, the air thick with absence. The hum of the engines was no longer the pulse of the city, it was the sound of defiance. The financial strain began to show almost immediately. The city's transit company, which depended heavily on black passengers for its daily revenue, found itself losing money at a pace it could not sustain. Every mile driven without riders deepened the hole in its accounts. The once profitable system became a symbol of failure, and as the boycott persisted, the losses became impossible to ignore. Officials who had once scoffed at the protesters now faced mounting pressure from business owners, whose profits were tied to the workers who no longer took the buses. Downtown shops saw fewer customers, as many black residents refused to spend money in establishments that supported segregation. The boycott, peaceful yet powerful, began to squeeze the city's economy like a tightening fist. But beyond the balance sheets and empty buses, something more profound was happening. The boycott had changed the rhythm of Montgomery itself. Streets once dominated by the whir of tires were now filled with the sound of footsteps, steady, determined, rhythmic. Men and women walked to work in groups, sharing the weight of distance and fatigue with conversation and laughter. Churches organized carpools, using every available car to ferry people where they needed to go. Mechanics volunteered to repair the vehicles for free, and families offered their limited fuel to keep the effort alive. Each act of generosity became a thread in a growing web of solidarity, binding the community together more tightly with each passing week. City officials, desperate to regain control, resorted to pressure and intimidation. Police began issuing tickets to drivers who participated in carpools, accusing them of operating illegal taxi services. Newspapers printed editorials urging people to return to normal, as if the injustice that sparked the boycott could be forgotten so easily. Yet the more they tried to undermine the movement, the stronger it became. Every attempt to break their spirit only deepened their resolve. Each fine paid, each arrest endured, became another story of courage whispered across church pews and front porches. As months turned to seasons, the boycott's endurance became something remarkable, a living testament to the power of collective will. Martin Luther King Jr., still young and relatively new to leadership, found himself standing at the center of a movement that was teaching the world what peaceful protest truly meant. His speeches reached beyond Montgomery, spreading a message of moral strength and nonviolence. "Our protest," he said, "is not against the white man but against injustice." Those words carried far, reminding both supporters and opponents that the movement's purpose was not revenge, but redemption for the city's authorities. However, the mounting losses became an open wound. Every empty bus was a public embarrassment, a daily sign of resistance they could not erase. The boycott had become a battle of endurance, and the community showed no sign of yielding. As local businesses complained, as the bus company teetered on the edge of collapse, officials found themselves trapped between pride and practicality. To give in would mean admitting that the old system was wrong. To persist meant bleeding resources until there was nothing left to protect. Behind doors, city leaders debated and argued, seeking ways to break the boycott without acknowledging its moral legitimacy. Yet the truth was undeniable. The people of Montgomery had discovered their power. They had realized that their cooperation was the lifeblood of the city's economy, and by withdrawing it, they held the ability to reshape their world. This realization was as revolutionary as any court ruling, for it revealed that even in a system built to suppress them, unity could become an unshakable force. By the middle of 1956, the boycott had drawn national attention. Reporters arrived from across the country, documenting the economic toll and the unyielding faith of those who walked each day under the southern sun. Images of worn shoes and long lines of walkers appeared in newspapers, turning Montgomery into a symbol of dignity and perseverance. The financial strain became a story of moral bankruptcy as well. The city could no longer hide behind claims of order and tradition. The empty buses stood as monuments to stubbornness on one side and to courage on the other. Even as the city's finances faltered, the people refused to bend. The longer they walked, the more the boycott transformed from a protest into a shared identity. It was not just about segregation anymore, it was about ownership of their future, about demanding recognition as citizens whose labor, money, and presence mattered. The authorities could control laws, but not loyalty. They could threaten individuals, but not silence a united community. When the Supreme Court finally upheld the ruling that bus segregation was unconstitutional, the victory was more than legal, it was moral and economic vindication. The boycott had proven that peaceful resistance could bring an entire city to its knees without violence or hatred. It revealed that dignity and unity could rewrite the rules of power. Montgomery's buses eventually filled again, but they did so under a new understanding. The people who once sat in the back had learned to stand together, and that lesson would echo far beyond Alabama. The city's leaders had been forced to confront an undeniable truth. The very people they had sought to silence had shown them the strength of collective protest. Rosa Parks' single act had ignited a movement, and that movement had shaken not just the buses of Montgomery, but the foundations of an entire system. What began as one woman's quiet defiance ended as a demonstration of the world-changing power that emerges when a community, united by justice, decides to walk together toward freedom. The months of tireless walking, the exhaustion from miles trudged through heat and rain, and the quiet, unyielding determination of Montgomery's black community had reached a crescendo in 1956, when the United States Supreme Court delivered a decision that would reverberate across the nation. Segregation on public buses was declared unconstitutional, a legal affirmation of what Rosa Parks and countless others had been living as a moral truth every day of the boycott. The ruling was more than a court judgment. It was a recognition that justice could prevail when courage was persistent, and it validated the sacrifices of ordinary people who had transformed simple acts into a movement that could not be ignored. For Rosa Parks, the news must have felt surreal. She had acted with quiet dignity on that December evening in 1955, unaware that her refusal to give up a seat would ignite a firestorm of organized, peaceful protest. The boycott that followed had been grueling, testing endurance, patience, and faith in ways few could have imagined. Every day that buses rolled with empty seats was a testament to the power of collective will, a demonstration that the strength of a community could challenge entrenched laws and centuries of systemic oppression. The Supreme Court's ruling was the culmination of those months of courage, a recognition that the legal system could reflect the moral imperative that had guided the protesters from the beginning. Montgomery itself was transformed during this period. Streets that had been ordinary thoroughfares became stages for resilience, as men and women walked together with a shared sense of purpose. Neighbors helped neighbors, organizing carpools, sharing rides, and offering encouragement to those whose feet and spirits were weary. Churches became hubs of coordination, not just for logistics, but for hope, faith, and strategy. Leaders emerged from within the community, guiding efforts that were both practical and symbolic. The boycott had created a culture of collective responsibility, a network of people bound by the belief that injustice could be challenged through patience, unity, and perseverance. City officials, initially dismissive, had faced mounting pressure as the boycott disrupted the local economy. Empty buses meant lost revenue, and businesses that relied on the patronage of black residents were forced to reckon with the consequences of discriminatory policies. Attempts to intimidate the protesters with arrests, fines, and threats only solidified their resolve. Each act of retaliation strengthened their sense of purpose, making the movement not just a local phenomenon, but a national exemplar of strategic, non-violent resistance. The Supreme Court's ruling was the legal acknowledgement that the strategy had been correct, that peaceful, collective action could compel the system to recognize human dignity as a matter of law. The decision also carried profound symbolic weight. It sent a message far beyond Montgomery. Segregation, a system designed to perpetuate inequality and fear, could be challenged and overturned through lawful, determined action. It signaled to the broader civil rights movement that persistence, organization, and moral clarity could achieve real, tangible change. Activists across the country drew inspiration from the victory, seeing in Montgomery a blueprint for how ordinary citizens could confront and dismantle systems of oppression without resorting to violence. Rosa Parks' role in this narrative remained central. Though she herself had never sought fame or accolades, her refusal to yield her seat was a quiet defiance. Yet it had sparked a movement that demonstrated the power of an individual act to catalyze collective action. Her courage reminded the nation that the fight for justice often begins with a single person willing to confront injustice with dignity and resolve. The boycott had elevated her from an ordinary citizen to a symbol of moral courage, and the Supreme Court's ruling enshrined her stand as a cornerstone of legal and social progress. The ruling's impact extended beyond buses and beyond Montgomery. It became a precedent in the broader struggle for civil rights, a reminder that discriminatory laws could be challenged and that systemic change was possible. It validated the strategies employed by the movement, demonstrating that nonviolent protest, combined with unwavering organization and ethical clarity, could achieve victories in the courts as well as in the streets. The legal triumph reinforced the moral argument, making it clear that laws designed to separate and demean were not only unjust but unsustainable in a society that aspired to equality. For the people of Montgomery, the ruling marked the end of a long, exhausting chapter but also the beginning of a new era. They had walked hundreds of miles, endured social and economic pressures, and faced threats to their safety. Yet they emerged victorious, having proven that a united community could hold power to account. The buses, once symbols of segregation, became instruments of freedom, and the victory was shared by every person who had taken part in the boycott. Whether through marching, walking, organizing, or simply maintaining faith in the face of adversity, the Supreme Court's decision in 1956 did more than overturn unjust laws. It illuminated the path forward for the civil rights movement. It underscored the idea that legal victories could follow moral courage, and that societal transformation required both steadfast commitment and strategic action. Rosa Parks' arrest had been the spark, the boycott the fuel, and the ruling the flame that burned brightly enough to light the way for generations to come. It proved that systemic injustice, no matter how deeply rooted, could be confronted and dismantled when people refused to accept the world as it was and instead acted to create the world as it should be. Through the lens of history, the Montgomery Bus Boycott and the Supreme Court ruling demonstrate the profound interplay between individual courage and collective action. Rosa Parks' refusal to give up her seat, the thousands who walked miles in solidarity, and the courts that ultimately recognize their claims form a narrative that speaks to the enduring power of human dignity, moral clarity, and the unyielding pursuit of justice. In that moment of triumph, it became clear that the fight for civil rights was not merely a series of protests or legal battles, but a testament to the belief that ordinary people, standing together, could reshape society itself and transform the principles of equality from aspiration into reality. The quiet courage of Rosa Parks, sitting firmly in her seat on that December evening in 1955, had ignited more than a local protest. It had sparked a chain reaction that would reverberate across the United States and shape the course of history for years to come. Montgomery, Alabama, had witnessed the power of unity, endurance, and moral conviction, and from that moment, the story of one woman's defiance became a beacon for millions who had long suffered under the weight of systemic injustice. The success of the Montgomery Bus Boycott demonstrated that change was possible, that ordinary citizens could challenge entrenched systems through peaceful, disciplined, and coordinated action, and that courage could take root in the most unassuming individuals, transforming them into symbols of hope and catalysts for transformation. As the boycott drew national attention, the nation began to see the broader implications of the struggle unfolding in Montgomery. Newspapers and radio broadcasts carried images and stories of African Americans walking miles to work, organizing carpools, and holding steadfast in the face of intimidation. These accounts did more than report events. They inspired others to consider their own circumstances and the ways in which they, too, could challenge injustice in their communities. Rosa Parks had not set out to become a national figure, yet her act of defiance transcended geography, racial boundaries, and social expectation. Her courage illuminated the idea that ordinary people could wield extraordinary influence simply by refusing to accept oppression as inevitable. The Montgomery Bus Boycott became a blueprint for activism, demonstrating the effectiveness of nonviolent protest and strategic coordination. The disciplined response of the Black community in Montgomery offered lessons that would be carried into the broader civil rights movement of the 1960s. From sit-ins at lunch counters in Greensboro and Nashville to the freedom rides challenging segregated interstate travel, the boycott showed that collective action, when combined with patience, moral clarity, and leadership, could force institutions to reckon with the demand for justice. Rosa Parks' refusal to yield her seat had ignited a moral awakening that extended far beyond bus routes, reaching into every facet of daily life where inequality and discrimination sought to take root. Her story began to inspire leaders and ordinary citizens alike. Young people, who had grown up in the shadow of segregation, saw in Rosa Parks a model of courage tempered by dignity, a person whose actions could spark societal change without resorting to violence. Ministers, teachers, and local activists drew on the momentum created by Montgomery to mobilize communities, organize protests, and demand legislative reform, the principles that had guided the boycott nonviolence. Collective responsibility and steadfast perseverance became foundational pillars for the strategies employed throughout the 1960s. From marches to voter registration drives to nationwide campaigns for civil rights legislation, Rosa Parks had shown that activism did not require grand speeches or political office, but could begin in a single, decisive moment of resistance that resonates with shared humanity. As her story spread, Rosa Parks' image and name became synonymous with the fight for equality. She was not merely celebrated as a local heroine. She became an enduring symbol of moral courage, inspiring people from all walks of life to examine the injustices in their own communities and to consider how they might respond. The boycott's success validated the idea that change could come through organized, principled action. Offering a stark contrast to the prevailing culture of intimidation and fear that had long kept African Americans in submission, her courage illuminated a path forward, one that emphasized the power of ethics and endurance over force and aggression. The effects of Rosa Parks' defiance were not limited to symbolic or emotional resonance. They had practical implications that shaped the national agenda. Lawmakers, business leaders, and policymakers could no longer ignore the voices of citizens demanding justice. The boycott's success illustrated that social movements could leverage economic and moral pressure to compel change, and that grassroots activism could serve as a catalyst for national policy discussions. Rosa Parks' quiet act had evolved into a movement that demonstrated how local action, when executed with courage and coordination, could influence legislation, public opinion, and the very structures of power that upheld inequality. Moreover, Parks' defiance revealed the interconnectedness of personal action and collective empowerment. Her choice to resist oppression on that single bus seat highlighted how one individual's moral clarity could inspire a community to act, and how that community, united in purpose, could influence the nation. The Montgomery Bus Boycott proved that activism is contagious. When people witness the courage of one, they are often moved to contribute, participate, and amplify the call for justice. Rosa Parks' example resonated in classrooms, churches, workplaces, and homes across America, igniting conversations about equality, fairness, and the responsibilities of citizens to challenge unjust systems. The momentum generated by Rosa Parks' courage continued to grow throughout the 1960s. The civil rights movement, building on the lessons learned in Montgomery, orchestrated large-scale demonstrations, voter registration campaigns, and sit-ins that challenged segregation and discrimination in every corner of the country. Parks' act had provided a narrative of hope and effectiveness. It proved that persistent, organized, and nonviolent resistance could achieve concrete results. The reverberations of her defiance were felt in legislation such as the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965, demonstrating that change was not merely aspirational but attainable through collective resolve. In the end, Rosa Parks' refusal to move from her seat became far more than an isolated act of personal courage. It became a spark that illuminated a path toward equality for the entire nation. It showed that moral courage, when coupled with unity and determination, could inspire a generation and reshape the social, political, and cultural landscape. The lessons of Montgomery extended well beyond buses, influencing every form of activism that followed and reminding the world that change often begins with the quiet defiance of one ordinary person who chooses to do what is right. Rosa Parks' legacy is not only in the victories achieved during her lifetime, but in the enduring understanding that individual courage, when shared and multiplied, has the power to ignite a nationwide movement, transform a society, and pave the way for generations committed to justice, equality, and human dignity. The courage Rosa Parks displayed on that December evening in 1955 came at a profound personal cost. Yet her resilience remained unshaken, illustrating the depth of her commitment to justice and equality. After her arrest and the eruption of the Montgomery Bus Boycott, her life was no longer quiet or ordinary. She and her husband, Raymond, faced relentless pressure from a society unwilling to accept that a black woman could assert her dignity without apology. Rosa lost her job at the department store where she had worked for years, a place that had once offered stability and routine. Without warning, the security of her livelihood was stripped away, leaving her and her family vulnerable to financial hardship. It was a tangible consequence of defiance, a reminder of the societal structures that punished those who dared to challenge them. Yet, even in the face of this sudden upheaval, Rosa Parks did not waver. Threats followed her wherever she went. Anonymous letters filled with venomous words arrived at her home. She was stalked, harassed, and intimidated by strangers who saw her act of resistance as a personal affront rather than a stand against injustice. Some nights, she and her husband feared for their safety, knowing that anger and hatred could manifest violently without warning. The pressure was relentless, yet Rosa remained composed, navigating a world that sought to punish her courage with calm dignity and unwavering moral resolve. Her life became a daily exercise in bravery, proving that commitment to justice often requires enduring personal hardship while remaining steadfast in one's convictions. Despite these dangers, Rosa did not retreat from the cause she had ignited. She understood that her individual struggle was intertwined with a collective fight for equality and human dignity. Her experiences losing her job, confronting threats, and facing social ostracization were not merely personal tragedies. They were reflections of the systemic oppression she had stood against. She chose to use these challenges as fuel, not as a reason to retreat. Each obstacle reinforced her understanding that the path toward justice is rarely smooth or free of sacrifice. Instead, it demands resilience, courage, and the unwavering belief that standing for what is right is worth the personal cost. In the years following the boycott, Rosa Parks continued her advocacy in every available form. She became a guiding presence in the civil rights movement, mentoring younger activists who were inspired by her example. Her work extended beyond symbolic protests and into concrete actions, participating in campaigns, attending marches, and speaking out against injustice whenever and wherever possible. The personal risks she endured did not diminish her commitment, they amplified it. Her experiences allowed her to empathize deeply with others who faced discrimination and to offer guidance, encouragement, and strategy based on first-hand knowledge of the sacrifices required for meaningful change. Rosa's steadfastness transformed her into more than a historical figure. She became a living embodiment of endurance in the face of systemic oppression. Communities looked to her not only for inspiration, but also for practical leadership. She offered a model of how to confront fear with courage, oppression with moral clarity, and injustice with deliberate, non-violent action. Every lecture she gave, every public appearance she made, and every moment she spent in activism was infused with the quiet power of her lived experience, the understanding that justice requires more than words, that dignity requires more than passive hope, and that real change is often born from personal sacrifice sustained over time. Her work extended well beyond the borders of Montgomery or even Alabama. As the civil rights movement expanded, Rosa Parks became a national figure whose presence and testimony reinforced the principles that had guided the movement from its earliest days. She illustrated that courage is not a single event but a lifetime commitment. That moral action does not end with personal victories but continues in persistent advocacy for the marginalized and oppressed. Parks' legacy is rooted in her refusal to allow fear, loss, or threats to dictate her choices, showing generations that ethical leadership often requires enduring adversity with grace. Even in moments of personal struggle, Rosa remained humble, never claiming the spotlight she had inadvertently earned. She refused to let fame or recognition dilute the broader message that equality and justice are collective pursuits, requiring participation, sacrifice, and a shared vision of a better world. She engaged with communities, schools, and civic organizations, sharing her story as both a cautionary tale and a call to action, emphasizing the importance of standing up for rights, even when it comes with personal cost. Her life became a testament to the idea that one individual's commitment can ripple outward, influencing not only legislation and policy, but also the hearts and minds of people who witness such courage firsthand. The threats, financial struggles, and social pressures Rosa Parks faced underscore the reality that standing against systemic injustice is rarely convenient or safe. Yet, through these trials, she demonstrated the transformative power of steadfastness. Her actions in the aftermath of her arrest bridged the gap between symbolic resistance and lifelong advocacy, proving that courage is measured not only in moments of visible defiance but also in sustained commitment to principles, even when no one is watching. Rosa Parks' enduring activism helped lay the foundation for continued efforts toward equality throughout the 1960s and beyond. Influencing legislation, inspiring grassroots organizing, and cultivating moral clarity in countless individuals, her life showed that the struggle for justice is continuous, requiring vigilance, compassion, and the willingness to endure hardship for the sake of a greater cause. In every act of mentorship, public engagement, and advocacy, she embodied the belief that personal sacrifice, when guided by principle, becomes a powerful instrument for societal transformation. Ultimately, Rosa Parks' journey after that fateful bus ride illustrates the inseparable connection between personal courage and lasting social change. Her loss of employment, the threats she endured, and the personal hardships she faced were not deterrents but catalysts that reinforced her resolve and deepened her impact. She became a living testament to the power of moral fortitude, showing that one person's steadfast commitment to justice can ignite movements, inspire generations, and alter the course of history. Her life reminds us that the pursuit of equality is not a momentary act but a lifelong mission, and that enduring courage in the face of adversity has the capacity to reshape societies, challenge entrenched systems, and leave a legacy that transcends time. Rosa Parks' story is one of quiet courage, profound resilience, and transformative impact, a tale that reminds us how a single, steadfast act can ripple outward to change the course of history. Sitting on that Montgomery bus on December 1, 1950, she could not have imagined the magnitude of what her refusal to give up her seat would spark. Yet, through her simple, dignified defiance, she challenged not just a seat on a bus, but the very conscience of a nation, confronting injustice with a moral clarity that inspired millions. Her courage illuminated the truth that one person, acting with integrity and resolve, has the power to ignite movements, shift perceptions, and awaken a collective sense of justice that can endure across generations. The legacy of Rosa Parks extends far beyond that single act. She became a guiding figure for the civil rights movement, a living embodiment of the principles of nonviolence, courage, and dignity. Her role in the Montgomery Bus Boycott demonstrated the extraordinary power of community organization, strategic resistance, and unity in the pursuit of equality. People from all walks of life witnessed how a determined, peaceful protest could confront entrenched systems of oppression and create real, tangible change. Rosa's defiance was not about rebellion for its own sake. It was about claiming fundamental human rights, asserting the value of every individual, and refusing to accept a world that dictated inequality as law. Throughout her life, Rosa Parks continued to dedicate herself to the pursuit of justice and equality, even after facing job loss, harassment, and threats. She remained unwavering, showing that personal sacrifice is often the currency of meaningful change. Her lifelong advocacy inspired generations of activists, teachers, and ordinary citizens to continue the struggle for civil rights and social equity. By demonstrating that courage can be both quiet and powerful, she left a blueprint for resistance that emphasizes moral strength over aggression, persistence over haste, and dignity over fear. Rosa Parks' story also reminds us that transformative change is not instantaneous. It requires perseverance, collaboration, and an unwavering belief in justice. The Montgomery Bus Boycott, which lasted 381 days, exemplified the extraordinary patience, endurance, and organization needed to confront systemic injustice effectively. It showed that even in the face of intimidation, economic pressure, and social ostracism, a united community could challenge and eventually dismantle laws and practices that perpetuated discrimination. Parks' role in this historic moment demonstrated that the courage of one individual could spark the collective will necessary to bring about meaningful societal transformation. Her impact reverberated well beyond Montgomery, influencing the broader civil rights movement of the 1960s and inspiring countless efforts to challenge segregation and inequality throughout the United States. Rosa Parks became a symbol of moral courage, dignity, and the enduring power of peaceful protest. Through her life and actions, she illustrated that change is possible when individuals choose to stand firmly for what is right, even when doing so comes with personal risk. She taught the world that justice is strengthened not by anger or vengeance, but by principled, persistent action, and that even small acts of resistance can ignite national movements that shape history. As we reflect on Rosa Parks' remarkable life, we are reminded that her legacy is not just historical, it is deeply relevant today. Her story encourages each of us to examine our own capacity for courage, to consider how we respond to injustice, and to recognize that individual actions, no matter how quiet, can contribute to the greater good. She showed that the path to equality and justice is built upon the choices of ordinary people who choose to act with integrity, even when the odds seem insurmountable. Her example continues to inspire movements for human rights, social justice, and equality around the world, proving that the power of one can indeed influence the conscience of many. Rosa Parks, known as the mother of the civil rights movement, demonstrated that a single act of defiance, grounded in moral conviction and human dignity, has the capacity to transform a nation's conscience. Her life exemplifies the extraordinary impact of courage, perseverance, and principled resistance. By refusing to accept injustice, she opened the door for generations to confront inequality, challenge oppression, and work toward a more just and compassionate society. Her story reminds us that history is shaped not only by the powerful and prominent, but also by those who choose to act rightly, with quiet determination and unwavering commitment to fairness. Thank you for joining us in remembering and honoring the legacy of Rosa Parks. Her story teaches timeless lessons about courage, integrity, and the enduring power of one person to spark change. If you found this journey through her life inspiring, do not forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss stories that illuminate the heroes who shaped our world. By supporting this channel, you help us continue sharing stories of courage, resilience, and the extraordinary impact of ordinary people. And together we can keep the lessons of history alive for future generations.